It's new too. All right, so I switched my computer, so things are behaving a little differently. But well, another thing is different. It's Thursday night, and here we are doing an evidence-based triathlete.
Yeah, is this our first Thursday night? It might be.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah, this is good.
so we're switching it up this week, and we're going to pick up with a member spotlight next week, and no evidence-based triathlete tomorrow because we will be doing the swim and rack event down
Yes.
at Lake Las Vegas. So
Yes. So, how you doing, John? How's the week of training and race prep going?
yeah. Well, at this point, the as much hay as I could get into the barn is in the barn.
Exactly.
I I don't think I can. I don't think I have any more time to put more in. I will do, one more decent weekend,
Yeah.
but I'm really interested in recovery at this stage,
Yeah.
because yeah, the Hawaii 70.3 is next, not this weekend, but next weekend. And at this point, it's probably better for me to be rested rather than trying to be a little overtrained. So,
Yeah. John, it's interesting. The longer I've been in triathlon, the more I've recognized that, you know, for me, 10 to 12 days out, it's time to start resting. And
yeah.
it's time to start dialing it down. I used to really have really tight tapers, like 6 days,
Mm-hmm.
5 days. It's never worked as well as going 12
Oh,
over 10
yeah.
and just doing a slow ease in, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like you end up losing more fitness in the long run by doing that because then you take a week off afterwards.
Yeah,
But it only takes a couple weeks after that to get back to where you were,
that's right. Right.
and you'll race better. Um, and that's what it's all about, right? Is like figuring out how on race day to get from the start to the finish as fast as you can.
That's right.
And
Well,
then
my trick
you're right about
is,
the hay in the and you're right about the hay in the barn for sure. It's there,
yeah, yeah,
right? You can't put any more in at this point.
mm-mm. And yeah, because now I really run the risk of getting to the start line injured or too worn down, and neither of those is good. So at this point, I'll be a little bit. I'm either going to peak right on, or we'll see. So, but the other thing, I've stacked races, so I've got Coeur d'Alene 3 weeks after. So,
Yeah. But I think the thing is that you also, you have the years behind you,
hmm
right? And we've talked a lot about consistency of training and the consistency of the build over for you decades.
yeah,
And that is something that you know I don't know. It's the I don't know. It's something almost nebulous,
hmm
right? And you get to take advantage of the years and years of consistent training.
yeah,
And what you can do, by even by taking 12 days into a taper, is something that if someone was their first race and they're just getting into this, they may not get the same bang for their buck.
hmm
And it's something that we need to really consider when we think about the newer racers for sure.
No, that's true, and I think the more years experience we get, the more we learn to trust that our fitness is pretty good, and then to get to that start line and really just have the confidence that you can do the race and do it competitively. So
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
see. So yeah, we'll talk next week, the night before the race. So
Are you sure you want to do that?
oh yeah, that'll be fun.
Okay, I'm really looking forward to you kind of doing what I did in St. George and kind
Yeah,
of breaking
yeah.
things down. And I'm really interested in to see I'm sure you'll run your best bike splits
hmm
and that I'm very interested to see. Is there any? I mean, obviously there's a chance, but is there any word that the race is not going to happen?
No, not at this point. Everything seems right on track. So,
Right.
so this past week, I pulled out my race shoes, and I said, "Well, I better run in these."
Yeah, you better.
Yeah, just to make sure that that's all good. And I ran in them, and they had been sitting around for over a year,
Over a year. That's not a
and
good
they are
thing.
just way too stiff. So, and then the top part of the shoe, the upper, is very inflexible. And probably what happened was I finished the last race and just never, I probably should have washed them really well,
Yeah.
but I didn't think I'd be storing them that long. So, so they got a little, so I went out and had to pick up some other shoes at this point.
And what'd you pick up?
Well, I went with the Hoka Carbon SX2, but then I also got another pair of Bondies that that I train in,
Yeah.
and so I'm actually debating which one I'm going to run in at this point. The Bondi is a bit heavier, but it's the shoe that I've been running in,
Yeah.
whereas the X is the carbon insoled shoe, and that runs a little bit different.
Yeah. And but you've ran in that shoe before. That
I
is
have,
your
yeah.
that was your race shoe, correct?
Well, actually, the last race I ran in was the Nike 4% shoe,
Okay.
and I really like that foam. But,
And that's the one that got too stiff?
yeah, it did. Yeah,
It's interesting.
yeah, the upper, not the sole, the upper more so. And so,
Interesting. So, that's obviously we talked a lot about that's the shoe that I'm now racing in.
oh, is
And
it okay?
and and in love with the shoe.
Yeah, right,
I
right.
fall in love with shoes, and and the tricky thing, and we're gonna, obviously tonight we're talking about running shoes a lot. I fall in love with shoes, but then I got to be really careful not to always train
Mm-hmm.
in that shoe,
Right.
right? And so like mixing it up. So today I ran in a Tempo X instead of the Vaporfly.
Mm-hmm.
And I trail run. I have trail running shoes, and I think it's really, really important that we mix it up. I don't know what your thought is on that about mixing up shoes.
No, I love it, and we talk about variability of training
Yeah.
for the running shoe specifically, and the problem with running is it's such a repetitive movement that if you do the same thing over and over and over again, you end up stressing the same structures the same way over and over and over again. And just tapping my finger, that's not going to hurt. But if I tap it for 1,000 times or 2,000 times or whatever over the same way, that may actually end up causing more pain and damage down the road. And so what we often talk about is trying to mix it up, just like you said, do something different, run on grass, run on road, run on trail, run in different shoes. And
Yep.
I think running in different shoe models and brands of shoes, that's a great way to mix it up. And what you do is you change the stress, you change which structures are being stressed
Yep.
and how they're being stressed. So that's also where you got to be careful not to have too big of a change too soon.
No, that you're absolutely right. Yeah, the too big too soon is I mean, that's what we've been kind of harping on this for a year and a half,
Yeah.
right? The
Hmm.
too big too soon on anything is where we get injured.
Yep.
And everything should be subtle. And
Hmm.
so when you get a new pair of shoes, even though they feel like they're the best thing ever, you should keep the old ones and rotate them in. And
Hmm.
like for me, like you know, I, I have a quiver of shoes,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
right now I'm on a little road trip, and I've got one, two, three, four pairs of running shoes with me.
Oh, nice.
And because I got shoes that I want to do for trails, I have
Yep.
shoes that kind of are better for like more mixed stuff, and I have some my racing shoes that I want to do for speed work, and actually nowadays even like longer slow runs in the race shoes. um, and you just keep mixing it up. I think it's really important.
No, it's good. And, and part of that comes back to the majority of running injuries. Although we can't exactly put our thumb on why someone gets hurt, we have lots of different ideas. But at the end of the day, the majority of running injuries are going to be related to training errors.
Yeah,
Someone made a mistake. And the funny thing is, a lot of people will first look at the running shoe as
the
a
culprit.
way to prevent running injuries or a cause of running injuries. And unfortunately, the running shoe is either getting too much credit for preventing an injury or it's getting too much blame for causing an injury. Because bottom line is, it's a training error that you did. You ran too many miles in that shoe on the wrong surface.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And my career has been about dealing with injured athletes, right? And I can't tell you how many athletes like, oh, look, it's the shoes that were the reason, or a piece of equipment if it's a different sport, right? Like, oh, that was the reason. And you look at it and it's like most of the time with the overuse injury, it's not the equipment, it's training error.
Mhm.
And so many times in my career, I've had coaches in particular that I had to battle with. To
Yeah.
like give athletes a break and reduce their load, and don't take even when I used to, a long time ago, worked in a high school as an athletic trainer and with the track athletes. And hey, track season starts whatever March 15th, and the athletic training facility is loaded with people March 16th through the end of the month, because these kids went from sitting on a couch to
Mm,
all of a sudden, hey,
yeah.
we're going to run 5 miles, and it doesn't work,
Mhm.
right? And then the coach is like, oh, it's because the kid had bad shoes. And it's like, well, their shoes weren't great. I won't disagree with you on that, but these are training errors,
Mhm.
and you can't go from 0 to even 20 miles a week, which is pretty, was kind of
Yeah.
typical,
Yeah.
um, and not have these, have these happen. I'll give you one other kind of anecdote. It's the swimmer turned runner.
Mm.
This had actually, I actually saw this personally, where there was a swimmer who was injured shoulder, right? And so the coach was like, okay, well, you're going to run. And the well, how much? Well, the team is going to be swimming for an hour and 15 minutes, so you're going to run for an hour and 15
Mhm.
minutes. And
Yeah.
within two days, stress fractures,
Yeah. Wow.
right? When you think about it, it's a fish out of water,
Yeah.
right? But the problem is the guy had the cardiovascular endurance and the muscular strength
Mhm.
to basically break his own legs,
Mm.
right? And and I'm not saying there wasn't maybe some other issues, maybe some nutritional issues or whatever. I'll also blame vitamin D on this because he was swimming inside all the time, so probably his vitamin D status was low. But it's really interesting when you see that's that stark,
Mhm.
like 2 days creating a stress fracture, and it wouldn't matter if he what shoes he had. I could tell you, I could tell you that.
Not like that, because that is, and what's interesting is stress fracture is a broken bone.
Yep.
And a lot of people sometimes like to dismiss, well, it's just a stress fracture. No, that's a broken bone.
I would actually rather have a something fall on my leg and break my leg than actually have a stress fracture. Like honestly, because I've
Yeah.
seen so many of them in my business, um, that take some and sometimes don't heal, have non-union stress fractures, and
Yeah.
a broken leg. It's gonna, I mean, for the most part, it's gonna heal in 6 weeks. We
Yeah.
know that there's a very definitive timeline. A stress fracture, there's a lot of variabilities that go
Yeah.
into. So
Well,
you're right.
what's interesting is, you say, have a swimmer go out for hour and 15, hour and a half run. I mean, if you're running 80 strides per minute, each foot is getting about 2,500 impacts with, for every 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And that every time that foot hits the ground, it's, one and a half, two, maybe two and a half times your body weight. And so one foot strike's not going to be a problem. Two's probably not going to be a problem. Three, 2,500 in just 30 minutes. So on each side. I mean, this is a big problem. And so, yeah, that training error is, doing too many of those too soon, regardless of the equipment.
Yeah, and I think another little anecdote is I used to work a lot in soccer. That's kind of was
Mm,
where I cut my teeth in athletic training, and these kids would be running around on really hard surfaces in Las Vegas, right? So this is back before we had really nice soccer fields in Las Vegas, and the ground is hard, especially in the winter, really hard. And these kids would be running around in the probably not the most appropriate cleats, but the
mm,
interesting thing is they didn't get hurt very often because they were so used to it. And it's the thing about, they had this hard soled cleat that, yes, some kids got hurt, but for the most part they didn't get hurt. And so then I'm like, well, if they don't get hurt in those, why do people with these nice soft running shoes built to run? Why do they get hurt and and say it's the shoe,
Mhm.
right? Because if you look at a soccer shoe, there's nothing to them. There's no arch support. This is a flat. It's very flat. There's definitely no cushion.
Mhm.
Definitely no cushion to it. And the ground where we were playing definitely wasn't very cushiony. And so it is really interesting that we do blame the shoe. And so I think we've done a good job of that. So John, what do we if we can't blame the shoe, and let's say it's not a training error, then what else do we have to blame, or what else do people blame? Because it's sometimes
Well,
you still have issues.
yeah, so some of the leading ideas on why someone gets hurt is that magnitude of the force or how fast that force increases once the foot hits the ground.
Yeah.
And then also it's related to how the foot moves when the foot hits the ground. But again, one foot strike's not going to be a problem. It's the repetitive nature, and that's why that training error is taking that 5,000th step. That's the problem, as opposed to doing 3,000. But the other
So
injury mechanisms are magnitude of force, rate of force development, and then how much. And this one's very controversial now. How much movement the foot has, and I'll use the word pronation.
yeah,
Uh,
because that's what I hear people blaming.
yeah, that's
I
right.
actually don't hear them blaming the first two things,
Hmm.
and sometimes I don't hear them blaming pronation. Oh, I was born with feet like this,
Yeah, right.
or I have a leg length discrepancy, or well, my knees turn in and that's the reason, or this, or this, or this, or this. And they look to themselves as like, oh, this is how I was born,
Hmm.
and I can't run, or I get injured because of that. To me, that's like the next stone that somebody unturns, right?
Yep.
And what is there, what are you seeing in the research on sort of the biomechanics side for that kind of stuff?
So I'll tell you the classic way to fit a shoe was to have someone figure out their footprint while standing still. So you get and you'd read advice like, well, get your feet wet, step out of the shower and see your footprint.
Yeah.
And then if your footprint is such that the inside part of your foot is on the ground and you have a big wide footprint, well, then you would be, an overpronator and you would need a certain type of shoe. And that was thought to be a very mobile type of foot. And then the other way is if you look at your footprint and you see a wet spot at the heel and a wet spot at the forefoot, but nothing in between showing up in your footprint. Well, now that's maybe a more rigid foot. This is, the classic idea. And then everything in between those still. And that would, you would see, you could still see a lot of shoe recommendations based upon that footprint. Well, come to find out, that footprint doesn't have anything to do with predicting the amount of movement a foot's going to have during running, because we have the ability to measure pronation. We have the ability to measure how the foot moves while running, and it's not related to that footprint.
I think we could add here, John, maybe we should just really quickly define pronation. Can you do that for us?
Yeah. Okay. So pronation at the foot is the same as pronation at the hand, or supination is the opposite action. I always like to think supination, if you put your hand out, you hold a bowl of soup, so you turn your palm upwards like that. And at the foot, that's what you're doing for pronation, is you're allowing the foot to turn the other way, so the foot to turn outward. So if you're looking at the back of a runner, the heel will point outwards as your foot is in contact with the ground.
Yeah, and it's not truly your arch, but the inside of your foot will fall.
Yeah, right, right,
That's
right,
another good way
right.
to. I think you're right. So you have the rear foot is going to the outside of the heel is going to point to the outside,
Yep,
and then the inside of your foot is going to
yep.
fall in. And I think it's really important that we tell people this, that everybody pronates when they run, and
That's right. And
when
just
they hit the
just
ground.
so my biomechanist
Yeah.
friends listening,
Okay.
pronation is actually a three-dimensional
Right.
movement, and it's based upon that the way the axis of the what we call the subtalar joint, or the joint right below the talus, which is right below those two knobby spots that are on your ankle. That's the way that axis is. And so what happens is, when research, we actually talk about calcaneal eversion, which describes that rear foot pushing outwards. But as your foot rolls inward during the stance phase, what actually also happens is the front part of your foot sort of moves outwards, so it abducts, and it also goes through dorsiflexion, so the top part of your foot actually comes up. So it's this combination thing. So pronation is a real sort of
It's a
loose way.
difficult. It's actually a really difficult term
It
because
is. It
because
is.
it's three movements in one,
Yeah.
and we're talking about multiple joints that it's happening at. Right. We're not just talking subtalar or talocrural or the navicular,
Hmm.
calcaneal, or it's a combination of all those movements. And once again, it is a normal thing
Yeah.
that happens. And we kind of classify these people as potentially overpronators
Hmm.
or underpronators, but everyone is going to have some amount of that movement
Yeah.
when they run or when they foot strike, even walking.
Hmm.
So that being said, I think that gets a lot of blame.
It does, and it's actually it's a mixed bag of research.
Yeah.
And what people have looked at is the relationship between the amount of pronation that happens during stance and injuries, as well as how fast pronation happens in injuries,
Or
uh,
lack thereof, right? On the
or
opposite,
lack thereof. That's
or
right.
they.
That's
So
right.
this is a bell curve of
Yeah.
in a lot of the research, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Bottom line, though, it's too hard to draw a relationship between that single parameter and any running injury.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not a cause and effect for sure,
Hmm.
but I think it gets a lot of blame.
It's gotten a lot of attention, and our shoe designs are very much influenced by this by this pronation movement that actually happens. And so when you walk into a shoe store, you'll see shoes that are stability shoes or neutral shoes.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the whole idea behind that is to control or not to control the movement of the foot.
Did you ever notice that race shoes are always neutral?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, because you want to make them as light and as
Exactly.
flexible as possible.
Exactly, because there's an arms race to who can make the lightest shoe possible, right?
Hmm.
So, so that being said, I've ran into people that say, "Oh, I can't wear a race shoe because there's not enough stability
Yeah.
in." And so this was kind of the way I wanted to go with this tonight was to really talk about, okay, is your shoe the thing that you need to provide stability to you,
Hmm.
or is it something intrinsic in you that you can train to gain stability? What would you say to that?
Uh, I'd say that's a loaded question. So
And that's why I asked you.
yeah, it's 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 impossible for me to answer,
Good.
and here's why: is that we can take well, we can take you and I, and we could just use two pairs of shoes, and they could be on different ends of the spectrum in terms of motion control. And you and I will have very different responses potentially to them. Now, why would I respond one way? And when I say response, I mean movements. So if we measure the amount of pronation or external calcaneal eversion, if we measure that, or we might even measure knee movements, uh, the amount that I have in one shoe is going to be very different than, could potentially be very different than you. And that's because we're built a little bit different. We have different running experiences, and our movements are inherently different too.
To me, it's really interesting when you talk about an athlete and you talk about, for example, how strong is an athlete.
Hmm.
And if you think about a runner, oh, look how strong their glutes are. They can squat this amount. Oh man, they have really strong quadriceps, really strong calves. I rarely see people talk about the strength of their foot.
Hmm.
And you mentioned 2,500 hits per half an hour,
Yep.
right? Don't you think we should really be looking at the strength and I'll throw this out there, the mobility or lack of mobility in the foot.
Hmm.
And to me, like this is a big missing piece in working with athletes and getting them to actually strengthen and or increase mobility or decrease mobility
Hmm.
in the foot and address the foot rather than, oh, my hamstring, my hips, my calves, my hip flexors, whatever. I never see people doing foot exercises,
Yeah, that's true.
and I do foot exercises, and but I don't do them enough because I only do them when I'm injured,
Hmm.
right? It's bad.
Hmm.
I wish I had more discipline to do them more. Um, but there's in some of the athletic training literature, there's good evidence to support that if you strengthen people's feet, they get hurt less.
Mm. Hmm.
And it makes sense, right? Like if you're on your feet all the time,
Yeah.
and this is the contact point for so many sports, that you got to have strong feet. And then the antithesis to me of strong feet is putting people in shoes,
Hmm.
which ultimately are, and we talked about this a little bit last week, shoe coffins or foot coffins, right? What we're doing is we're putting a cast on somebody's foot and not allowing that foot to be exercised in many ways. I don't know where the biomechanics world is on this, but this is where the athletic training world is going. I don't know
Hmm.
if you have any experience with that in the biomechanics world.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
This is the shoe pendulum that
Yeah.
keeps swinging back and forth between minimalist shoes or barefoot running. And one of the arguments for using a minimalist shoe is that it allows the foot to behave the way the foot wants to behave. Uh, and so, probably about 10 years ago, there maybe a little bit longer, there was a big push to go barefoot running. And this argument was being made that the shoe was restricting movement and therefore causing weak feet. And therefore, and the hypothesis was that's related to running injuries. Well, unfortunately, the running injury stats never changed, even though there's a big movement towards minimalist shoes. And then, lo and behold, this pendulum swung to the other side, and all of a sudden, there's extreme cushioning shoes, so something with a lot more cushioning. And we're going to see the same injuries because the injuries are related to training errors.
Yeah. But
And
I contend the training errors might be running too much, or not even running too much, but spending too much time in shoes.
mm-hmm,
Because I actually think that running in running shoes is what you should be doing.
mm-hmm,
But should we be in shoes all day long that are very rigid and which a lot of people are
yeah,
in very rigid, almost like casts
mm-hmm,
on their feet? And I'll also throw out, I have many friends that are orthotists.
mm-hmm,
That orthotics are also can be very dangerous.
mm-hmm,
Basically, putting somebody holding them in this one position
mm-hmm,
is basically like a cast,
yeah,
and not allowing them to I don't know what the word is, but to test themselves and to train themselves. One of the things that I know I did this with the soccer athletes I worked with is, as soon as the game was over, shoes off,
yep.
we're going to jog around the field.
I love it. And I'll tell you, here's we're using the 30-minute run as sort of our basis for discussion. That's 2% of the day.
Yeah,
You've got 98% of the rest of the day to be in something else. And so, like you, I advocate being in bare feet as much as possible, but run in shoes, because they're yeah, it's a little hard to run in bare feet in Las Vegas in the summer.
no, it's basically impossible. And I, like, once again, I wouldn't advocate that at all.
Mhm.
But I'm the same with you. And then I will even say that when I do my weight training stuff, I'm always shoeless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I want to challenge my feet, right? If I'm doing, for example, let's just hypothetically say I'm doing an overhead press.
Mm-hmm.
What I like to do is a little less weight and do it standing on one leg.
Yeah. Right.
right? Because now I'm challenging the intrinsic muscles of my foot.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not as much as I'm challenging my arms, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
still challenging them, and I'll be doing it sometimes standing on a Bosu ball or
That's right.
an Airex pad or something to just challenge my feet
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more. And I think that's I contend that a lot of runners could do very well by trying to go that route. John, I also have this deal with my students often that, especially pre-COVID when we were actually lecturing, I'd go to class and I'd take my shoes off.
Oh, nice.
And I'm like, hey, I'm trying to preach to you how important this is.
Yep.
So I'm going to take my shoes off as I'm walking around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made a point of having really nice socks.
Mm. There you
You
go.
know? And and once again, maybe it's because I'm Canadian and it's a Canadian thing, but in Canada, you do not wear your shoes in the house,
No, that's right.
right? And it's the same in Asia too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Then
very much so.
yeah, or you go into the platforms,
Yeah, that's right. The clogs.
the clogs.
Yeah.
So I think that people could do well to look at that, and then I always contend that if somebody has a lower body injury, we should look at their feet
Mm-hmm.
and look at their foot mechanics and look at how much flexibility they have in their first toe, for example, is huge. How much flexibility they have in their subtalar joint, or sorry, their ankle joint. Um, I think we're often missing the boat, and we're just throwing, yeah, we're coming up with excuses, I think.
Mm-hmm. Or looking for that next shoe to
Exactly.
heal an injury
Yeah.
or
Which
treat an injury, which is not
which
what we want.
you'll never find a shoe that will heal your injury. What it'll do is it'll put you in a new compensation pattern,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we've talked a little bit about compensation patterns before, but in biomechanics, what do they call that? A compensation pattern? No,
Uh,
the same
you're
thing.
adapting. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I put you if you've never been in a motion control shoe before, which is going to limit the amount of pronation you have, and you've got, for example, a knee injury, chances are pretty good it might actually take it away
Mm-hmm.
because I'm changing the kinetic chain, right?
Yeah.
So then it's like, oh man, that shoe is the one. It fixed my problems.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're going to go run again, and you're not used to that pattern, and that's a compensation pattern, and you're going to get injured, and it might be something else.
Well, and that's see, I love that, and I think that's where even running on worn shoes. Okay, now I guess you can't tell on here, but that part of the shoe is entirely worn down.
Yep.
I waited too long to change this shoe because even if I get the same model shoe, I've
Yes.
already figured out, my body's already figured out how to run in this shoe, which is worn down here.
Yeah.
So now I use the same model, I look it up, same size, same color. I start running in it, then I may actually end up getting an injury because now the shoe is entirely different.
And
And
then
my
we blame the
brain,
shoe companies.
that's right.
Oh man, they must have changed how they made them.
Yeah, well, we do that, and
That does happen,
and
but I'm
they
saying
do
same
that.
shoe, same model. It shouldn't be that different. But I'm the same with you. Like, because I often buy two pairs of shoes. Once I find the shoe I like, I buy
Yep,
two pairs,
yep,
and so then I can. But I try and rotate them and use them at the same time. I don't
yep,
keep a pristine pair like hidden away somewhere.
yep.
Um, but if I used to do that, I used to keep a pristine pair that I'll wear next, and
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly was it. I was like, oh, I put those shoes on. I'm like, oh, these are horrible.
Yeah.
Like this is not good. And I'm like, it's the same shoe.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I I've changed the shoe, and now the shoes I've compensated for the change in the shoe.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think this is such fun stuff to talk about because I mean honestly, this is a never ending conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think as people think about their footwear, it should not be static. It should not be one pair of shoes. And like you, I run in two pairs of shoes. I just rotate them back and forth. And then I will start bringing in a new pair.
Yep.
But I do make the mistake of sometimes waiting too long. Like even with my race coming up. I've got this race, and I'm like, why didn't I figure out what I was going to race in a month ago? It just it's funny how sometimes those things sneak up on us. So now I've got a new pair of shoes, and you know, but my run, I just went for a 3 mile run just to try it out. And then I went back to my other shoes because I don't want to run too much in this pair of shoes. I want to allow myself to sort of figure that out.
So, John, what advice would you give to somebody if they asked, how many runs should I have in my race shoe before I race in it?
Uh,
Because I've had that question come up to me, and
yeah,
there's no evidence
there isn't.
for
No.
this. So, what would you say?
So, well,
Not what
let
you're
me answer
gonna
this.
do. Not what you're gonna do, because
Yeah,
you
I
messed
know.
up.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
in the optimal world would you have done?
Well, what from a research perspective, there is not a lot of good data on this, but we did do a study while ago. We never published it. We need to go back and do it again. Is that we repetitively reloaded one shoe. I think it was the right shoe, and we put on 500 miles on the shoe. I don't remember the number, but it was something like that. It was 300 to 500 miles. And so we had a and we used a machine to put that repetitive loading in. Okay, so it was a very specific protocol we followed.
It's very annoying when your office is attached to the lab
That's
that the machine is going. I'm just gonna say.
right. It's a very loud machine, and it's very monotonous, and it's yeah, it can drive. It's like it's yeah, it's not good. But so now we had two pairs of shoes, one that had whatever 500 miles, and the other that had none. And we had people then, we put them in the shoes. We didn't tell them that the shoes were different and had them run across our instruments in the floor. And there was no difference in the impact force between those shoes. Right, so I don't know, what does that tell us? It tells us, well, maybe they were changing each foot strike in a way that they ended up with the same amount. And so therefore, maybe they are running a little bit differently, or maybe that shoe mileage didn't make a bit of difference in terms of the shoe. I
One,
actually think it was a third thing. I think we ended up. Uh,
but I think that, well, maybe you're gonna just say this, but the third thing is the person didn't put those miles in, right?
yeah,
So the shoe didn't break down to them,
I tell you.
and then they didn't come up with a new compensation pattern for that shoe, because a person will come up with a compensation pattern for every shoe.
Yeah,
And that's exactly what we're talking about,
yeah.
right? Is using that to our advantage by changing shoes.
hmm
So yeah, I'd be really interested to see if you took someone 500 miles after they were in the shoe versus
yeah.
the brand new shoe.
Well, that's another study that we want to do,
Yeah.
and we do want to do the real life mileage accumulation because I think that is important.
Okay, so back to
And
the question: how
I
many
know,
runs?
and that's where it's going. I was trying to evade it, but yeah. So we don't have any data on what happens in that situation. But my point is that you adapt quickly to a
Yes.
new situation. Okay. Sometimes even within one step, you will all of a sudden figure out something's different, and you're going to run differently. How different it's going to be, we don't know. And so that's why I can't answer the question in terms of how long do you need to run in that shoe ahead of time, but you do need to have some experience in it to let your brain figure out how you run in it. But I don't know, I can't tell you how much that is.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a tricky question. I think the answer is you need to run some,
hmm
right? And then the other thing I would add, you need to run some, but also you need to run some at the pace you're going to race in
Yeah,
that shoe,
that's a great
right?
point.
Because it doesn't do you any good to take out your race shoe and do an 8 minute mile if you're going to race a 6:30
hmm
mile,
Yeah.
right? Because the compensation pattern will be different.
hmm
Sorry, it won't do. I'm not gonna say it won't do any good. Actually, it will do some good,
hmm
right? Because the compensation pattern is probably going to be relatively similar.
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan of several. It doesn't have to be the full run, but several pieces of the run should go into that speed that you're
hmm
that you're going to run at. And whether that's a half marathon speed, a 10K speed, 5K speed, whatever race it is, I think that you do need to do that. And it may
hmm
only be like, for me, when I'm getting ready for a race, it may be like 5 times 1K at race pace with 5 minutes in between,
Yeah.
and just getting my body used to that shoe at that speed. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that and you're right. You compensate really fast,
Mm-hmm.
but you got to do it. I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned don't run at a 10-minute mile if your race is at an 8-minute mile.
Yeah.
But for an Ironman, think of it the other way too.
No,
And that
absolutely.
you've got to practice walking in that shoe, especially if your strategy is to walk the aid stations.
Yeah.
And
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think we've talked a little bit about this, and I think we need to talk more about it as more Ironman races come along. Um, but how much time are people that are training for Ironman actually training at that pace?
yeah.
And a realistic pace, not a pace that on my best possible day I'm going to go out and run a 3:30
Hmm.
3:30 Ironman when you've never been under 4 hours. Oh, well, if I train at 3:30, then I'm going to race at 3:30. No, you're not. You might get down to 3:50. So maybe we should be training and practicing more at that pace.
Hmm.
Everybody wants to do the sexy intervals,
Yeah.
but those don't pay the bills in an Ironman.
No, you got to have that durability and that patience
Yeah.
uh, for it to be
And the
to be
compensation
successful.
pattern to maybe be running at 12-minute miles,
Hmm.
right?
So now let's come back to my situation that we talked about in the beginning. Now I've got shoes that are probably more geared towards, more on the racing type shoe, and then I've got a pair of shoes that is more the training. So now I've got to decide which way am I going to go? Am I
This
going
is
to go with
exactly
the
what we
shoe?
went through with me like a month ago.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But you were fortunate. You started that process sooner than I started it. I was already my brain was already set on running in one particular type of shoe. But
All right, so John, this weekend you got to go to the lab, get the heart rate going,
yeah,
put in the pace on the treadmill of exactly what you think your race pace is going to be, and see
yeah,
what happens to your heart rate.
yeah, right.
I mean, that's the simplest way to do it without doing a bunch of
Yeah,
a bunch of tests, and it would be really interesting to see because I actually think huh, who knows what will happen because
I
your
know.
body's used to the Bondi,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So because that's what I found with me is my training shoe was just as fast as the racing shoe,
right.
right? Even though it was heavier,
Mm-hmm.
but I was so used to it because I'd put 400 miles into the training shoe and I'd put
Yeah,
10 miles into the racing shoe. So of course I went with the racing shoe,
I know.
but
But then and this is the other unknown factor is, oh, but when I get out of that T2 and I put on those racing shoes,
there's a psychological piece,
it's the psychological piece. So,
and they're lighter, right? So
yeah.
what I never did was swim for 35 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
bike for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and then do it.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because maybe at that point, 2 ounces actually does make a difference
Mm-hmm.
when you're that fatigued at that point. And
Mm-hmm.
and then and once again, and I didn't do it. Taking it a step further, an hour into the run,
Mm-hmm.
I'm even more fatigued because then maybe 2 ounces actually does it makes it maybe potentially exponentially more difficult
Yeah. Yeah.
or less difficult. Yeah.
All right, so let's try to give some actionable items for people now
Yes.
that we've gone through the complexity of running shoes.
This is
So,
probably at least our fourth or fifth time talking about running shoes, and we're going to talk about them more and more.
yeah.
But yes, let's take our take homes for today. What do you got?
So if you're looking for that right pair of shoes, it takes a while to figure out what that right pair is. And unfortunately, it's a lot of trial and error. And we do we say find the comfortable shoe, which is terrible. We've been researching, the influence of shoes on running biomechanics and physiology since really the 60s and definitely the 70s. And the best we can come up with, you pick a pair that's comfortable. Now, comfortable, what is that? What is that? Standing, putting the shoes on, comfortable running. We don't, we still
I,
don't
I
know.
would say comfortable. In my opinion, comfortable running because that's what we're going to be doing in it.
Mm-hmm.
But standing around in your shoe store
You know,
doesn't really cut it.
Mm-mm. And so I think that, that's one thing, but you probably want to start, you don't need a high-end shoe. You don't need a low-end shoe. You probably need something right in the middle in terms of price range.
Yeah.
And I would also start with probably a neutral shoe without knowing anything else, and try running. If you start running in it and you feel any sharp pains, wrong pair of shoes.
Yep.
That's
Agreed.
victory. You can say, this does not work.
Yeah. Or if it just feels awkward,
Yeah.
I'll throw that out. Like I've tried some really expensive shoes
Mm-hmm.
and got them and ran 10 minutes. Like, nope,
Yeah.
those are not good for me. And you should. You absolutely need to find shoes like that because then you can take those off of your
Yeah.
list.
And the pain doesn't necessarily need to be in the foot. It could be in the knee.
Yeah.
It could be in the hip. It could be in the back.
Or it could just once again just be it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Like you'll know when you have a shoe that doesn't feel good. Yeah, agreed.
And then have the mindset that the first pair that you pick may not be the pair that you ultimately are going to end up with, maybe more long term. And so just know it's an investment on footwear.
Yeah. And then I would also contend that work on strengthening your feet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are, I mean, if you go into YouTube and look, thousands of videos on foot strengthening, like not maybe thousands, hundreds of videos on foot strengthening, and they all have, not all of them, but some of them have really good merits to them.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, it's your foot that is doing what it's doing, and if it's over pronating, there are muscles that can be strengthened to reduce the amount of pronation. That can slow the amount of pronation.
Yep.
And if those muscles are completely weak and fatigued, or fatigued really easily, by putting a shoe on that's going to stop that, well, you're not going to strengthen those muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I personally think that that is a big missing link in running, and not just running in sports medicine, but in the athletic training world. This is a big topic right now. This is foot strengthening, and not just strengthening, and then looking for areas where somebody is either too mobile or not mobile enough, and
Mm-hmm.
addressing that. If somebody had a tight hip flexor, for example, and we can assess that relatively easily, we would address it.
Yeah.
Right. But once again, looking at the foot. So I'll add that
Oh, I
piece.
love it. And being bare
At
feet as much as you can.
Yeah.
90% of the day is not running, most likely.
Exactly. So you'll be the guy at work in socks, just like me.
That's right. I just go on bare feet, and this is where my wife and I would end up with a little arguments too, because I'd have the kids running out in bare feet, in literally bare feet, not without, with not even socks on, and so
Yeah.
their feet get all dirty. Then they come in the house.
Yeah.
I'm like, but they're developing their feet.
Exactly. And now your kids got strong feet, right?
That's right, and they're doing good. Okay, so one more I'll say is, if you have a knee injury, if you have a foot injury, if you have a hip injury, you most likely have the wrong shoes. So abandon those shoes and either go with this idea of, strengthening a foot. That's good, but try a different pair of shoes, try a different model, try a different brand. Don't be brand loyal.
Yeah. And I guess the last piece then is which we started out with, and then look to your training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Look to what you're doing, and have you ramped up your training too quickly?
Mm-hmm.
Were you, just because your friends were all going to go for a 20-mile run this weekend, and your longest run has been 8, and you're like, oh, I really want to go with them. That could have been the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yep.
And be careful with that as well.
Or you say, yeah, we're been running 10 miles, and now you can do 10 miles on a trail. Totally different.
Totally different. Yeah. Okay. Awesome stuff, John. Well, thanks for the Thursday night. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the Mercers live from Hawaii next week.
Yes. Well, I'm looking forward to being in Hawaii. It'll be nice to be there.
Okay, great. I honestly have no idea where I'm going to be next Friday. I got it planned up somewhere in Montana. Too. I'll be somewhere in Montana next Friday, so we'll see.
That'll be fun. Awesome.
Okay.
Good talking.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.